it's not about me. It is not about my family and this heart and whatever. It's not about me. It is about Him and what He can do and what good He can do with this and how this can be a ministry and a discipleship to others.
At 34, Whitney Hubbard faced the imminent need of a heart transplant to preserve her life. Today, she shares not only the story of survival, but the perspective and spiritual enlightenment that came with it. Welcome to A Stronger Faith, a podcast that gives you a front row seat as everyday people share the experiences that change their faith. I'm your host, Stacy McCants, and we pray that God uses this conversation to move you toward Him and give you a fresh perspective on your faith. Today, Whitney Hubbard shares her rare perspective as the recipient of a heart transplant. Meet Whitney Hubbard. Whitney Hubbard.
Hello.
I am so glad that you're here. When we started this podcast, I made a very short list of people that I felt like had some pretty profound experiences that had to have shaped their faith and impacted others, and you were on that list. We've known each other, not super well, but we've known each other for a number of years. I knew you before you went in, and then I've had a few conversations with you since then. But yours is a remarkable story, and I don't know the depths to which God has moved in your life, but we're hoping that we reveal some of those today. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, good. And for those that don't know, which will be most of the people listening, I think only locals will know, but Whitney had a heart transplant. When was that, 2016?
2016, yeah, so we're 5 years.
Wow, 5 years, heart transplant. As I think about a heart transplant, and I realize modern medicine is just unbelievable, but the thought that you can take someone's heart out of them, and as complex as that is, and replace it with another person's heart, and that there is any possibility of surviving and life continuing, blows my mind. It has to be one of the most complex things there is.
It's kind of crazy. I mean, to think about that really is something that can happen, and then for that to actually be my experience is crazy. To be like, wow, I was one of the ones that was so blessed with that gift, because not to get into too much craziness, medical stuff, but there's anywhere from a little over 3,000 people a day on the heart waiting transplant list, and about only 2,000 get them. So there's a lot of people in this country, in this world, that stay on that list and never get one. That's a hard pill to swallow, to be one of the ones that gets chosen for that.
Yeah, and there's got to be a whole lot of things that go on the inside, spiritually and emotionally and otherwise, and we'll get into that, to be a recipient.
Yeah,
there's
a lot.
Yeah, it has to be. And the first things that come to mind is, one, there are a lot of people that want to be recipients that don't get it. And two, what must take place for you to receive another human being's heart. So, and that's tough. And we definitely want to talk about that. I think we probably ought to get a little bit more of the backstory on what put you in a place where you had to have a heart transplant.
Yeah, so I was born in 1982. Totally just aged myself. But the reason I say that is because 10 years before I was born, there really wasn't a whole lot they could do in the medical world as far as what I was diagnosed with. So when I was born, I was a C-section baby. And a lot of C-section babies are blue when they come out. And when they were doing their little, I guess, newborn test and stuff they do in the room, my heart rate bottomed. And so they rushed me to a different hospital in town that was known for hearts. And they discovered I was missing one of the main valves. So a person's born with 4 valves. I only had 3, which made me single ventricle, which is the bottom chamber of your heart. And that creates lots of problems going forward. However, because I was born when I was born, they did have some new technology and surgeries and things like that. And so I went through a series of 3 surgeries from the time I was 4 years old and younger. So I think my first one was when I was like 3 months old, and my other one was when I was like 16 months old. And then I had my first open heart at 4. And that kind of bought me time until high school, started having some rhythm issues. And they kind of knew that since the surgery I had when I was 4 was still relatively new, they didn't know the long-term effects. And so when I got to high school and started having some rhythm problems, we, messed around, in my words, as far as like, what do we do? Where do we go? That kind of thing. They kind of got me to a place where I was okay for the time being, and put me on some different medicine, things like that. And then in college, ended up having a lot more problems. And I didn't realize at the time how sick I was. The hospital in town sent me to Chicago because they were known for the surgery that I was going to potentially have to have in college. And it was such a blessing. I mean, all the doctors, that hospital, the procedure they did, it was amazing. Truly, they bought me, 10 extra years before I had to have transplant. So when we went to Chicago in college to talk about this surgery and stuff, and when we got to the point where I needed the second open heart surgery, we talked to them early in college, and then I got to my senior year and I went for my local evaluation, and he was like, it's time to have the surgery. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm a senior. I'll graduate and then I'll have it in August. And he was like, no, we've got to do this now. And so this was in December of my senior year of college, and I had my second open heart surgery in February of my senior year of college. And basically what they did at that point was take apart everything they had done when I was 4, rework everything, and put it back together and put a pacemaker in. It was about a 16-hour surgery. It was the longest one that I had had, and even more complicated than the transplant surgery, to be honest. But that surgery bought me those 10 extra years. And that surgery was fairly new. I was the 96th patient to have it done. And so again, they didn't know the long-term effects, but what they knew at that point is that they were able to do something and put off transplant for a little bit longer. So I knew at some point in life that I was probably going to have a heart transplant. I just didn't know when.
Yeah, when did you learn that you were going to have a transplant?
So after my surgery in college, life went on. I was doing great. I got married. I was working full time. And then Edward and my husband and I started talking about children. And we always knew that was going to be a challenge. I was told since I was about 16 years old that children would not, I should never carry a child. That would just be too hard on my heart with the increase of blood flow and all of that. And so we had met with our team in town, and then we were going to Chicago to meet with our team up there because I was seen at Chicago once a year, and I was seen in Birmingham once a year or twice a year. And we had been to fertility specialists and some things like that, just kind of gathering some information, seeing what our options were. And when I went up to Chicago for my evaluation to kind of get their blessing to move forward, I was having a rhythm issue in the bottom chamber of my heart, so in the ventricle. And when you have, it's called VTAC for short, when you have that, it can be very life-threatening. It can send you into cardiac arrest. And I had no idea I was having it. I had AFib before, which is in the top chamber of your heart. And so when it's in the bottom, though, it's definitely more life-threatening. And the pacemaker that I had at the time was not it didn't fix that rhythm. It only could fix the top part. And so we discussed options. What was I going to do? They didn't find any like long runs of that rhythm. It was very short, and that's probably why I didn't ever feel it. But it was happening. And so they sent me back to Birmingham and wanted me to get evaluated for transplant. So when we were in Chicago and sitting in that room, and the doctor came in and was like, as far as kids and all this stuff goes, I'm fine with you having that, but we really have another situation to talk about. And she said, you're having VTech. And I was like, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. I don't feel anything. I feel great. This is the best I've felt in years. Like, we just came up here to talk about babies and what our options were. And Edward and my mom were with me. And she was like, well, I could list you for transplant today because of that. And I was just kind of like, okay. I looked at my mom and Edward. I thought my mom was about to fall out on the floor. Edward was just kind of like a deer in the headlights. Like, what are you talking about? We're not here yet. And so they didn't know what to say or do. And I just was kind of like, okay, what do we need to do? Where do we go from here? It's fine. Whatever we have to do, we will do it. You just tell me what we need to do and we'll move on. And so she said, well, I want to do some more investigating about this, and I want you to go back to Birmingham. I'm going to call your doctor. They're going to get a plan together, all that kind of stuff. So I called my dad. I think the coolest part of this story is I called my dad. My dad sells heart valves, always has. And so
really, before you were born?
Before I was born. I mean,
that's unreal.
Total God thing. And that he was interviewing, I think, with Chick-fil-A and ended up taking a job with this medical sales company. And so he has always sold heart valves. He sold pacemakers at one time too, but he has been with this company since I was born. And it's been such a blessing because not only can he explain everything to me in normal terms, but he also knows a lot of the doctors. And that can be very beneficial. That's
unreal.
It really is. Like, it's amazing. And so Dad usually was on that trip with us to Chicago. And because we just made it like an annual trip. Why not?
Yeah, but this wasn't going to be about the heart. This was going to be about
babies.
Babies, that's right.
Yeah. And so he wasn't there. And I can vividly remember, like I still have the picture in my head. We all left. Edward, my mom, and I all left the hospital, and they were dead silent. Like, nobody knew what to say. I don't think my mom, being a mom, and I'm not a mom, but I can totally get this and understand this. I don't think she ever really went there with transplant.
Yeah.
You know, she had heard it before, but if you ask her, she was like, that was the first time I ever knew that you were ever going to have a transplant. And so she was shocked. I mean, beyond shocked. And I was like, Mom, where have you been the last 28 years of my life? We always knew this was going to happen at some point. But I think, she just blocked that out. And I get that. Edward knew, but we were all so caught off guard, honestly, and so shocked because I really had been feeling amazing, or I thought I had been. And so anyway, we leave. Everybody is like so silent, not knowing what to do. It's like lunchtime. I'm like, do y'all want lunch? Like, what do y'all want to do? And they just don't know what to do. I'm like, let's go back to the hotel and just regroup, and then we'll go eat or something. And so I just remember standing there in the hotel room, and we had this huge window that overlooked the street in Chicago. And I called my dad, and he was like, hey, babe, how'd it go? And I was like, well, I mean, overall things look good. And I was like, but they did find a little something. And so we're going to have to, go back to Birmingham, and they want me to get evaluated for transplant. And he was like, oh, Whit, he was like, you know what? It's going to be okay. He was like, this is just another chapter in your story. And so since that day, I have always looked at my life now as just a big book and with many, many chapters. And that chapter at some point will end and you'll get to flip the page to a new chapter. And he was so right. You know, this is just another chapter in the book and it's going to be okay. And so I kind of just took that with me and we came back to Birmingham and started the evaluation process. And it takes a long time to do the evaluation.
Really?
Yes.
What does that look like?
So they literally check you from head to toe. You do MRIs and CAT scans. And I mean, I had so much blood taken from my body, I didn't know that I'd have any left. And x-rays and EKGs and ultrasounds. And they do like tests that I didn't even know existed, like leg tests to make sure your blood flow was fine in your veins and your legs and there weren't clots anywhere. And, you know, of course, like pregnancy tests and are there tumors anywhere? Is there cancer that we don't know about? I mean, so you get worked up real good.
Wow.
And so we kind of started that process, but they ultimately decided at that point that my heart was really actually too healthy to be listed. And so even though I had this VTAC, you know, what were we going to do about that? And so I had a little thing, I called it my lunchbox, and it was a defibrillator. And it was probably the best, you know, $1,200 that we ever spent because it was a peace of mind to a point. Because if for some reason I was somewhere and went into VTAC, that defibrillator had to be with me because that would be the only thing that would bring me back. I guess not the only thing. I mean, God works miracles every day. But so I had this little lunchbox that kind of went around with me. I had to tell my work. I had to tell my friends, my husband, my family. They told me to tell the local fire department because if something happened, then they would already be aware that I was in that position and had been defibrillated or whatever. It was really cool. It was very easy. Anybody could work it. And that was kind of my first time I learned how major portable defibrillators were. That's an amazing technology. But anyway, so I carried that around. We debated whether we were going to put a pacemaker defibrillator in me. My pacemaker battery was running out at that point. But ultimately, we decided that we weren't going to do it. To put me through another surgery at that point, when I wasn't having like life-threatening runs, is what they call it, of VTAC, it was just there that I was okay for the time being. So we went to Chicago in May of 2015. We kind of evaluated all that summer, did all, you know, some of the workup and stuff. And then, no, this was 2014, did all of that. Kind of took from like August to December to have discussions with surgeons and all that kind of stuff. And I got called 2 days before Christmas and was like, that's when they told me that I was really okay for the time being. And they were just going to monitor me really closely every 3 months, make sure I had my defibrillator with me, that kind of thing. So that was 2014. Fast forward to 2015. In one of my liver evaluations, because what doctors didn't know back then when I was born with all of this, is that the pressure that the heart puts on the liver for our whole lives, or babies like me, for our whole lives, the liver takes a serious beating and it kind of takes over the work that the heart can't do when the heart's not functioning as well. And so the liver gets damaged. And my heart had been fine, but my liver was starting to go. So we did some more testing on that throughout the summer of 2015 and started reevaluating for transplant because it's only good for 6 months. So we did all the reevaluations and stuff, and my family had met with the surgeons again because things were, getting serious at this point, and we kind of knew that we would be listed. It was just a matter of when. And so October of that year, I was sitting in a church meeting, and got a phone call, and I knew that I had to answer it. And it was one of the coordinators. So we all have these transplant coordinators that you kind of coordinate literally your whole life through. And she called me and she said, "You're officially listed. We got notice today and you'll get a letter in the mail." And so that was in October of 2015. And I got my first call for my first heart December 2nd of that year. That one ultimately did not work out, but my doctor had told me it could be anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, and he was pretty dead on with those stats. And so, yeah, pretty much 6 weeks after I was listed, I got my first call, and then 6 months after I listed was the heart that I have now.
So you've had the condition since birth, but through your teenage years, it seems like this was going to be something that we would have to probably deal with later in life as technology developed, as the procedures that they had done early on began to sort of run their course, and that end of life wasn't necessarily on the table. This was a condition you had that you would live with your whole life.
Right, exactly. It was something that, you could live with, or they thought, they were going to try to get you to live as long as they could. Before, it's kind of crazy because most of these patients around the time that I was born and stuff, again, they didn't know the long-term situation or effects or how long things were going to last. And so when we started living into adulthood, they didn't know what to do with us because nobody had made it that far.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, nobody had made it that far. And so that's really cool and kind of a miracle in and of itself, is that there's this whole little group of congenital heart patients that started making it into adulthood, and they had to figure out, okay, now that they're with us, we got to figure out how to keep them here. They're doing great. And now we have to develop some things. And so
you guys are blazing the trail into a new territory for us all. Yeah, that adds an entire new dimension to the deal. It's not like there's precedent, right?
Right.
And there's not. So you're everything's kind of new with you and your generation, which is a little scary too.
Right.
But through that time, through your teenage years, you weren't necessarily living with a fear of death.
No, not at all. I was able to do anything I wanted to do, and growing up, and I was very active. I was a cheerleader. I was, on every committee and board and whatever you could do, Bible school, Sunday school, all of that. I danced for 18 years. I danced competitively. I did, any kind of dance you can do, I did. And,
so there are very few restrictions on, if any.
Yeah, I had very few restrictions until I started having some rhythm issues. I had to settle down a little bit. But again, was able to go to college, do what I wanted to do. Just stayed active. So again, I don't know when the first time I heard transplant was, but I knew it was there just from what I had read and researched.
But transplant gets into, this is a thing we got to do, or your life could be in danger.
Exactly.
Versus what it was before is we're going to do these various things throughout your life and you're going to be fine, but, with some maybe restrictions. It sounds like, though, from just what you've said here, that you were raised in a faith-filled environment.
Yeah, grew up definitely faith-based, had a great church experience, great youth group, really good youth pastors. And then through our school as well, there was another program that we all kind of did on Wednesday nights with them, and went on mission trips. And so, yeah, I would be nowhere with all this heart stuff is what I call it sometimes without that. I don't know how I would have gotten through some of what I've gotten through without that.
Yeah, well, I think about how you must be dealing with your condition just as a girl growing up, but from a spiritual perspective. So you've gotten a foundation. I don't know if you, because you're young, right? Really young. And did you have a spiritual perspective? Were you able to have a spiritual perspective about your condition at that time? Or was it just like, hey, cool, I'm learning about God, and I'm dancing, and I'm a cheerleader, and I got this heart thing, I go to the doctor every now and then, and but life goes on, and it's fine? Or were you, at what point was it around transplant time, or when was it where you began to marry up this God thing with this heart thing?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. When I was in high school, just growing up, I was just living life like any other normal kid. Yes, I had my faith, but I didn't really connect those two. And when I say connect those two, of course, like if there was anything going on with my heart, or I was looking at another surgery or trying to find another doctor or whatever the case may be, of course, like seeking him and his answers and praying and asking. But, you know, to me, it was kind of separate because I really didn't acknowledge that I had a heart problem, truly. My doctor looked at me one day and was like, Whitney, I wish that sometimes you would remember a little bit more often that you do have a condition that you need to be careful with. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. Because I just grew up like every other child. Of course, I knew I had it. And like I said, I had limitations. Sometimes breathing didn't always come easy to me. I couldn't run, which is crazy because I was a dancer. So I could, dance on stage for 3.5 minutes. And sure, I was completely out of breath when I came off, but I was never a runner or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I just kind of grew up with everything was fine. And I go to the doctor every 6 months.
As if you had like a dairy allergy or something.
Exactly. And then I think it became really real when Edward and I got married. Well, let me back up a little bit. When I was dating Edward in college, I guess it was our junior year, and I don't know why I remember it was our junior year, but I was like, okay, Edward and I have been together for a little while. If this is something that is serious and is moving forward, then I've got to have some tough conversations with him. And what guy, as a junior in college, wants to talk about future children to somebody that you're not even engaged to or married to?
Yeah, we need to be talking about pizza, beer, and where we're going to go watch the football game at.
Right, exactly. So I was like, oh gosh, I really don't want to do this. But I did not feel that it was right or fair to him or I to continue down this relationship, because we met freshman year and did that on and off dating all through college, where we never really talked about what we were, but everybody knew we were together. And so I was like, I've got to have this conversation. Like, God just really laid it on my heart. Like, you're not going to be at peace until you have a conversation with him. And so one night I was just talking to him and I was like, hey, I don't mean to scare you off. And I don't mean, like, we don't have to go into depth about this, but I just want you to know that because of all my heart stuff, I'm not going to be able to have children. And if that is a really big deal to you, to be able to have a wife one day that can carry your own child, that's not me. I'm not your person. And he was so great about it. And again, I think it's, looking back, being a junior in college, but he also was so mature about the situation. And he was like, Whitney, I love you and I love what we have together, and I'm fine with whatever happens in the future with children. We will figure that out when we get there. But no, it is not important to me to be able, for you to be able to actually carry a child. If children are in our future and God wants us to have them, then we will find a way to have them. And that was the end of that conversation. And I was like, okay. So
that's rare.
It is.
That's amazing.
It really is. And I mean, because when we were talking about it later, I guess, a few years down the road, he was like, looking back on that conversation in college, he was like, I mean, nobody knows if they truly can have kids. And he's so right. Like, you don't. I mean, there's so many people out there that, can't have them or have been through IVF and multiple rounds of IVF or had to do adoption or just chose not to have children. And so he was like, it wasn't a thing to me for you to actually like be able to carry that child. It was just, if I love you and you love me and this is what God wants for our future, then we'll figure out life at that point. We don't have to know an answer today.
Yeah, and God's got a track record of doing some pretty amazing things with kids.
Yeah,
from
for
people
sure.
that shouldn't have kids or wouldn't otherwise have them. So,
but back to your question about the heart transplant thing is in faith is when, when did I realize all of that? I think it started kind of when Edward and I had those conversations in college, but then again, we graduated, we had jobs, we got married, we were just kind of living life until the whole children thing came up. And then I think really sitting in that hospital room in Chicago that day, and it was the first time that somebody had ever mentioned transplant as in like, this is going to happen. This is in your near future. Whether that near future is we're going to do this in a couple months or a couple years, we're here.
So that has to bring the possibility of your own mortality.
Right.
It pulls that card in.
Yeah, and I think that's why Mom and Edward were so shocked.
Absolutely.
In that hospital room that day. Because I think, immediately your mind goes to, oh my gosh, my child's dying. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my wife. But that's not, one, we weren't there at that point. But as humans, that's where you go. Yeah,
well, your percentages climb, right?
Right.
You are in the 0-ish range, probably 0 to 5 or whatever, if you just had to ballpark percentage rise. All of a sudden, if transplant doesn't happen, there's double-digit stuff. You're climbing that ladder of percentage likelihood that this could happen. And so I would imagine, if you're my daughter, that's pretty terrifying. If you're my wife, oh my gosh, that's, I can imagine the deer in headlights freak out kind of moment that would occur for them, maybe even more so for them than you. I think you have this, you've lived with this for a long time, and you've probably gotten to a place where, okay, well, what do we need to do next?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
So I definitely think it took, if anybody knows Edward, he's very easy, laid back. His heart rate rarely gets above like 45.
Yeah.
My dad says he's so laid back, he's laid out, because he is. He just is. He's so cool, calm, collective. Like he just runs, he doesn't really, he's just kind of flat. He doesn't run high. He doesn't get excited. He doesn't get mad. He's just, it's great. He's just level. And that's exactly what I needed in that moment. And for those next weeks and months and years going forward, for me, when I heard that, immediately I jumped into like medical life mode, I guess, as far as, okay, that's fine. If that's the card that's played for us, we just have to figure out how to play it. So whatever God's plan is, it's fine. We'll be fine. We're going to go back to Birmingham. We're going to get, some evaluation. We're going to get some knowledge. We're going to figure out where we are, and we'll take it a day at a time. I immediately kind of compartmentalize that and leave that on one side, because if you go the other direction, it's really emotional. And so I think once I had some time to come back home from that trip and process, there were many, many nights where I was crying in my closet, or I would take a shower because I didn't want Edward to see me in tears. And it wasn't tears of sadness or hurt or angry or scared. It was just emotion. I can't really explain it because I wasn't scared. That's the amazing thing too about this whole process, is that I truly had a peace from day one, that I knew whatever was going to happen, that God had this in his hands, and there was a peace that surpassed all understanding.
Well, how did you get there?
I don't know. I don't know if it was those moments where I was curled up on my floor crying on the phone to one of my friends, or I don't know. It's almost kind of supernatural. Like it was just like this overwhelming blanket of peace, and that has never left. I just have never worried about it.
I would think you would have to get to a place where you realized there really wasn't anything that you could do about it.
Right.
Anyway, if a surgery was going to take place that saved your life, all you're going to do is sign the form, lay there, and hopefully wake up at the end.
Exactly.
But you couldn't control the success of that. You could have a good attitude, and you could get yourself in shape before. There's things that you can do to aid that. But ultimately, I would think you would get to a place where you had to trust because there was nothing else you could do.
Exactly. And I think that's how I've always looked at my life and how I've always dealt with this heart stuff is it is out of my control. Yes, like you said, there are things that you can do as far as like you want to eat healthy, you want to exercise every day, you want to try to keep in the best physical, health that you can. But at the same time, at the end of the day, you can't control it.
Okay, so given those things and where you are now, and now the mortality thing has been pulled into play, what is your spiritual life like now? What is prayer like now? It's a different deal now because it's not just like, God, we pray that, this condition continues to be manageable and that, we make good decisions and that we have a good long life or whatever it is. Now you're on the list.
Right. So I guess leading up to the list situation, because before I was like officially listed, this had been really going on for a year and a half, the whole evaluation process. And like I said, in 2015, when my liver started showing signs of damage and we reevaluated, and my heart was really actually okay, but the liver becomes a major issue because you don't want to get to a heart-liver transplant if you don't have to. At that point, when I was about to be listed, I think there had only been like 87 heart-liver transplants done in the whole world since like 1988 or something. So it's not real popular. Let's just say that. So we were trying to avoid that. But I think, from day one, as far as like hearing this and knowing that in the next couple months, in the next couple years, like we were going to be at transplant, it really brings you to your knees. I don't feel like my faith really changed, but I dug deeper. And I think, when you can't find the answers as far as like the worldly answers, the medical answers, it does bring you to your knees, and it does bring you back to the Bible and to hymns that you love and things like that. And you just start seeking and searching, and it just brings you and draws you into a closer relationship with him. I thought I had a pretty close relationship with him, and then it just pulls you in even more. And that's all you can do, is because you can't change your situation. You can't change the medical outcome, and you can't change where you are at that point in life, or where I was at that point in life. But I knew that I could learn something from it. I knew that I could grow from it. And again, I just had this peace, and I just knew that whatever happened was fine. I knew that if God provided a heart and blessed us with that he wasn't done with me on this earth. And I knew that if he didn't, and if that heart went, those hearts went to other people, then he had done what he needed to do with me here. And I was okay with that. I knew where I was going, and I was at peace. The death part never scared me. And I don't know, I'm sure it scared my parents, and I'm sure it scared my sisters and Edward and his family. But I also know that we're all very strong in our faith, and that at the end of the day, if that's, where I was, that I wasn't to be here anymore, that all of them would be okay.
Yeah, that's tough. It's not like you were 75, right? I mean, you're a 30-year-old woman.
I was 34.
Yeah.
33.
With big life ahead of you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the hardest thing for me was, well, not the hardest, but one of the things is that when you get this news, there's so many thoughts that go through your head. I think at first, that day in October when I learned that I was listed, I was like, okay, this is great. We're going to be listed. And again, I compartmentalized that little area, and I tried to not let myself go to the other side. And when I say the other side, it was too emotional for me, and still is today, because that means somebody else has to die. And that part is so hard. For me, that was the hardest part about all of this. And so prayer became kind of a challenge for me at that point, because I couldn't figure out how to pray, because I couldn't pray, God, provide this heart, because that meant, in my mind, that meant that I was taking away somebody's wife, sister, friend, husband, mom, child. And, I had to really learn how I was supposed to pray and what I was supposed to pray. And so I really came to the conclusion, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I really just wanted him to be glorified in all of this, no matter what the outcome was. And so I just started praying that way. I couldn't pray for him to provide me a heart. I just prayed that whatever his will was, that it would be done, and that this would glorify him. And so obviously he, I guess still has plans for me. He wasn't done with me yet. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about that family multiple times a day. I mean, we're here 5 years later and I still have tears in my eyes. Thinking about them, because I don't know what they went through. I haven't met them. I would love to one day. I truly would. I understand both sides of it. I understand them not wanting to, and I understand them wanting to. And so you have to be, respectful of what they want. The only thing I know about the family is that it was a female in her mid-20s from Texas. And I've always liked big hair and big things and flashy stuff. So I feel like God knew that when he found a Texas heart for me, that was meant specifically for me. And so I love that I get to carry her on. Those first little while in the hospital after transplant, I was kind of having some major issues that doctors hadn't really seen before, or didn't happen that often, I guess, after transplants. And so I just would put my hand over my heart and be like, I know you're in a new place. It's going to be okay. Just settle in, and we're going to do this life together. And I'm not going to let you down. You feel a responsibility to take them on this journey, because in a sense, not only are you given a second life, but they're getting a second life. Even though they're physically not here on this earth, their heart is still beating, which means they're still around, which kind of blows my mind and is so crazy at the same time. But you do kind of feel like a responsibility to take care of them. So now I take her with me, and we have some good adventures. And when things, kind of start getting crazy, sometimes I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. Heart, just breathe, just settle in there, and we're going to be okay. But anyway, all of that to say was prayer was really hard. And I think that was where I truly learned to pray. I had been prayerful my whole life, but I don't think it was until the whole transplant moment that I really knew how to pray. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, I pray all throughout the day, driving in my car, here and there. And those early days in the hospital, there was some major prayer all day.
So how did it change? You said that was the first time you really felt like you understood how to pray. What changed?
What changed? So I think, growing up, like, I don't know that you're ever really taught to pray. I don't know that there's really a way to teach you how to pray. I think everybody's prayer life looks different. And I don't think any of it either way is right or wrong. I think however you feel like you can talk to God is how you should. But for me, I felt like growing up, like I had the normal, I guess is what I'll call it, everyday prayers. Like, thank you for this day. We're so blessed. Please keep so-and-so in your prayers. Like, it was just kind of like a check off the to-do list, I guess, for me. Whereas it kind of switched, or it really switched when I was listed for transplant. It became more of a deeper time with God. And it became more of a conversation instead of just a check mark on the to-do list.
I think that's really important. And I think you getting the perspective that you got to help you change and understand prayer better, differently maybe, it might be a better word there, is just really powerful. When you look at the way most people pray, especially earlier on, most of the prayer, I think you ticked a lot of those off. Certainly having a heart of gratitude and being thankful for the gifts that we've been given and the blessings that we have. Having a heart of gratitude is wise and excellent, and we should do that more. And then the rest of it seems to be petitioning, right? It's like, protect my family and give me good health and help me find my car keys and all these other things. It's like things that you want God to do for you can be a lot of what prayer becomes. But if you look at the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus was asked and the disciples said, teach us how to pray, we don't do a ton of this. Because the first thing he says is, our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name. Basically, spend time recognizing who God is.
Right.
And how enormous and infinite and good and love and powerful and all that God is.
Yeah.
And we don't do a lot of that. And I think one of the main reasons I think Jesus taught us to do that, because it reminds us of who we are and who we're not.
Right.
Right. The original sin is us wanting to be God, and God says, no, I'm God. You are not. And I think it positions us in perspective to Him well. And then right from there is like saying, God, all I want to do is align with your will.
Right.
And what I want is for your kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of love, and the kingdom of generosity and kindness and all that you are, to exist here.
Right.
Just like it is in heaven, exist here. And I'm not just saying on earth, but like in me. So you're big, I'm small, your will is right, mine is not, your kingdom is where I want to exist. And so you begin, if you listen to the way Jesus teaches us to pray there's very little petitioning going on there. Even in give us this day our daily bread, we're thinking like, okay, feed us and that sort of thing. And it really, I view that as, teach me more about the way you designed it to work. Give me that nourishment so that I can digest that and I can understand that and I can be more in line with your will.
Right.
And ultimately, added on, yours is the kingdom, and the petition is deliver us from evil and don't lead us into temptation. But all of it is about pointing toward Him rather than seeing what we can get, right?
Right.
Praying for that job, praying for the health of so-and-so. There's room for that. But we tend, I feel like, and I do the same thing, tend to overemphasize that. And it would seem, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it would seem that when you get to that place, especially as you're approaching transplant, and you get the transplant and that sort of thing, if you gain this perspective of, you're in control of this, you are God and I'm not. What I want is to be in alignment with you.
Right.
Certainly, I'd love to live.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. But you already know that.
Yeah. And I think something you were saying just kind of hit me. And I think the way my prayers changed so much was, yes, we definitely need to pray for others and healing and, the jobs and whatever. But I think it turned more of a praise to me, as like,
hallowed be your name.
Yeah, like, Lord, I know you have this in your hands, but I am just like, you are amazing and you are awesome, and I just wanted it to bring glory to Him, however it was. And that was my prayer early on. Like, right after I had got listed, I got a letter in the mail from one of my sweet dear friends in town, and she had been through a heart surgery herself years before, and we were having the same surgeon, that kind of thing. And it's actually kind of how we met, is because I saw her scar one day, and I asked her, I was like, if you don't want to tell me, totally get it, but I have a scar too. What did you have done? And that's kind of how we met. But anyway, she just wrote me the sweetest note, and in it she said, when I was going through my surgery, my prayer was that it would glorify Him. And I'm praying that for you. And that kind of became like my little mantra. I was like, yes, that is what I've been looking for. That is what I need to be doing. Like, it's not about me. It is not about my family and this heart and whatever. Is not about me. It is about Him and what He can do and what good He can do with this, and how this can be a ministry and a discipleship to others.
See, that is wisdom, because the world teaches us the opposite of that. The world says, wrong. It's
right.
Absolutely 100% about you. It's about you surviving. It's about you being strong. It's about you overcoming this adversity. And the wise realize it's not.
Yeah.
That is so powerful. That is a rich spiritual insight that is, once again, contradictory to the things that the world teaches us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I've had there have been tough times, I'm not going to lie, but I don't dwell on those times. Of course, I have my moments and I have my days, but as long as I don't sit in that, then I think it's okay. But overall, this experience has truly been amazing. And yes, I got a heart, and yes, I get to live, but I guess digging deeper and building a more intimate relationship with Him is really what truly happened through all of this, which is really kind of crazy that it had to bring me to something like that to get to that point. But if that's, how He needed me to get there, then that's what I needed to do.
Well, yeah, and it's what you've chosen to do, given what you've been given. I don't know necessarily that you were given this just so that these things could happen. I think it's possible that this is just the cards you were dealt.
Yeah.
And you chose which way to go and how you wanted to engage this condition. And not everybody chooses that.
Yeah.
And so you went to God. And you eventually got to a place where it was not about you. It was about Him. And ultimately the impact on others as well. So, yeah, I don't know that we talk about the sovereignty of God. And, man, I am into this lately. And
it's so hard.
It is hard. Because when you look at Scripture, there are things that God did cause to happen that could be looked at as, well, it wasn't super good, right? I mean, destroying cities and some other things like that. There are things, when you look at Job, God didn't cause that to happen, but he allowed it to happen, right? Satan caused it. And then there are other things that Jesus even talks about in Scripture that says it wasn't that somebody sinned or that there was some sort of punishment.
Right.
It just happened.
Happens, yeah.
And ultimately, all of it happens.
Mm-hmm.
If you look in John 9, ultimately, all of it happens so that the works of God might be seen in it. And we get to choose if we're going to participate in that, if we're going to allow that to happen or not. And ultimately, if we reject that, God's going to somehow take that, we believe, and still work it for good.
Right. Yeah, I had a 10th grade Bible teacher that talked about, you play the cards you're dealt. And you're so right. You do. You have a choice. You have a choice to be happy. You have a choice to choose joy. You have a choice to what path you're going to go down. And so, these are the cards that I was dealt. And that's okay. I'm not mad or angry or anything about it. That's just what landed in my lap. And then you have to figure out how to go from there.
Jesus actually tells us that there is going to be trouble. Mm-hmm. He never tells us that it's not. And it feels like the best thing we can all do is to be prepared when that kind of thing happens. It sounds like God helped you prepare along the way. He gave you a family that were a family of faith. He gave you a dad who literally, before you were born, was in the business of mending hearts and selling valves and those kinds of things. He gave you a husband who isn't an emotional roller coaster. Yeah. Imagine if you had had a husband who was an emotional roller coaster or very volatile or something like that, how that would have probably made this road a lot more difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
God's prepared you for this, but we're told that these things are going to come. And it seems like the best advice for all is to get in a position where you're ready for it. Don't let it surprise you when it comes. Pray now.
Right.
Pray for God's will to be in your life now. Pray for that closeness. Actively be in pursuit of God as He is in pursuit of you, so that when the time comes for your adversity, mm-hmm. that you've got a foundation that can't be shaken, and that's how you're going to get perspective and get to the other side. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, through this whole journey, and it's definitely a lifetime journey. I mean, it has been since I was born, and then since I had transplant was another journey. It's not only the journey of like getting over transplant and getting well and kind of moving on with your life, but it's you're kind of always looking at that. Like as far as transplant, I mean, a transplant can last a congenital patient 13 to 15 years on average. So at some point you're looking at another one. I mean, the hope is that you would get 20 to 30 years. So yeah, it's a journey, but I think from the very beginning, there's a couple things that have always come to mind and been on my heart, and God's given me some words through that. One was perspective. One was peace. One was patience, because this process can be daunting sometimes. Tests can take a long time to get. Patience with each other, patience not only with doctors and in the medical world, but patience with God, patience with Edward and my friends and family. And then also perseverance, because it's not a sprint. It is a marathon, and it's a marathon the rest of your life, medically wise, but also mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And then, one song that just kept coming to me the whole time was Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And I've just kind of taken that on as my song, my hymn. And because in there it talks about new mercies every morning, and no matter what the day before brought, there was always hope for tomorrow and new mercies the next morning. So whether it was a tough day in a hospital or, you know, a disagreement with Edward, you know, you can hang on to that and know that there's more to come. And I think the whole perspective conversation, you know, that word continued to develop and change with me after transplant, because you do truly have a whole new perspective, a whole new take on life, because not only have you been given another life, but you've been given another life to take care of. And so, you know, I've always said, don't go to bed angry. Well, how many times did I really live that out? Now, I feel like I truly do live that out. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. Do I pray for grace every day in certain areas? Absolutely. But you do gain a whole new perspective that some people may never get. And I think I always thought, you know, after each procedure or after another surgery, previous surgeries, that I was like, oh, I have this new lease on life, this new perspective. I'm always going to be happy. I'm always going to be joyful. Well, in reality, you're not. But until I had that transplant, it really didn't hit home with me. And you would think, knowing, or the people that know me, knowing what all I've been through my whole life, as far as, like I said, all the procedures and surgeries and this, that, and the other, and the chance that we weren't even supposed to make it into adulthood, that I would have already had that perspective on life. But until I really was listed for transplant and then had that transplant, it really changed again. And it really makes you live your life in a way that it's like, you're not promised the next minute, much less the next day. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. So I don't live in fear by any means, but I don't sweat the small stuff. I let the things go that aren't important. You know, if the house isn't cleaned or not perfect or whatever, when somebody comes over, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. It's fine. There's more to life than that sometimes. And so, you know, I really truly have been, it's such a blessing to have that perspective, because you do live your life in a different way. I could be really bad about holding grudges. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not perfect, but I let it go. I mean, Edward and I don't fight, really, I will have to say. We really have a great marriage in that aspect. And if there was a disagreement or whatever with Edward and I pre-transplant, I might not talk for 3 days. Because I was just like, I'm mad at you. I'm not, no, until you apologize how I want you to apologize.
I'm sure nobody is familiar with that on here.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's had that experience.
Oh my gosh.
Post-transplant, if we have a disagreement or an argument, I may not be like in the best mood after it, but we make it a point to talk about it, have that conversation, agree to whatever it is, and then move on. And that, to me, has been life-changing in marriage, because I don't go to bed angry with him. Sure, are there times where I don't like him all the time? Of course, I'm sure he doesn't like me all the time either. I love him every day. And yes, we are going to have disagreements and arguments and whatnot. But if we, you know, it really has taught me how to go through that with him, how to have those conversations and not hold a grudge and not be angry, because you don't know what tomorrow brings.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I'm just listening to you describe it, and it makes me think that it's almost like you keep a firm grip on the bigger things that are really important and a little bit looser grip on the things that make you mad sometimes, but are not ultimately that important, that you can get over.
Yeah, exactly. And like, again, I know that I've said this a million times. I'm not perfect by any means. I mean, there's plenty of times where I'm irritated with my mother, or, you know, one of my sisters has gotten under my skin, and I'm not the best at calling them back and being like, I'm so sorry. That was so rude of me. I was so ugly. What we were talking about did not even matter, and I had an attitude about it. So am I still working on those things? Of course. And I have a long way to go, but at least now I recognize it and I can acknowledge it and know that, why did I say that to her? Or why did I act that way to him? Or whatever it is. And so it's just this, I guess, this like perspective, this picture that gets painted in my mind of, it's just always on the forefront of my mind, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just always there where I'm like, oh gosh, that was rude of me. I need to apologize to her. And so instead of in the past letting it go or hanging on to it, now I try to do my best to call that person or send them a text.
Do you take the initiative now?
Yeah, I do, for sure. And I think I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
great word. I definitely take the initiative now. I don't do it all the time and I'm still working on it, but it's clear to me now when I need to.
You need to give us all the keys on how to take initiative in making peace.
It's hard. It's hard sometimes, but sometimes like...
Have a heart transplant? Is that what it takes?
Exactly. That's it. Just do that and then you'll be good. But I think, sometimes I guess now we're in a world of texting a lot more than we do calling. And so I think sometimes, things can come across a different way in a text message. And so sometimes I'll go back and be like, oh no, I sounded so rude or so ugly or so blunt or whatever it was in that. And so then, and it just weighs on my heart now. I just start thinking about it. And until I go back to that person and either apologize or say, I am so sorry if that sounded rude or ugly. I did not mean it that way. I can't move on from the situation now because I know, and 99% of the time, the person's like, oh, I never thought about it that way. I knew what you meant. But I can't move on without making sure that relationship is okay.
Yeah, but Jesus taught us this, and nobody does it. I wouldn't say nobody. Most people, it's really hard to do, is take that initiative. He literally says, hey, look, if you find yourself going to the altar to go worship God and give him and be right with God, and you remember that your brother or someone else has something against you, stop what you're doing. Don't go to the altar until you've gone and cleared the air with this other person.
Yeah.
He's saying you need to clear that up before you're in a position to get right with me. And we don't do it.
Yeah, you're right. We don't.
We don't do it.
We don't. And it's hard. And it's not, and I think, again, that's where we all have to give each other a little grace, but also hold each other accountable to learn to do that.
Yeah.
Because again, you're not promised tomorrow. And so I want to make sure those relationships are okay. And I think the hardest ones I have is, if my mom and I have gotten in a tiff, or if I was just ugly to her about, I don't know, something. When she's in my house and she's doing the kitchen, how she would do it at her house. I'm like, Mom, stop. What are you doing? And then I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. She's just trying to help. She's here at the end of the day. Why was I so ugly? But I think, I don't know why my mom's the hardest one, but she's the hardest one for me to take that initiative.
Yeah.
Because we're both very stubborn.
Yeah.
Now she would say she's not stubborn, but
fight about that too. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the hardest one for me, is to be like, I need to call Mom and apologize because that was really ugly.
We all sit around waiting for the other person to apologize to us. That person owes me an apology, and I'm going to wait until they do it. And so often, it doesn't come.
Yeah.
And if it does come, it doesn't come. It comes with a but, right? Or
yes.
or whatever. Or here's why I did it. And I tell you, some of the most peaceful, and I don't do it often either, but I have tried to be a person who takes the initiative, and maybe even especially in times when I don't think I was at fault.
Sure.
And there is, you think that you're owed something, and that when you get paid what you're owed, that it's going to be okay. Lots of times when you get paid what you're owed, it's not okay. The best peace that I've had in those situations is when I've taken the initiative, as hard as it was, I just made myself do it, to be the peacemaker.
Yep.
And it's amazing how the tension goes away. And it's not a congratulation. It like instantly goes away. And it's what Jesus is he's saying, look, you want a peaceful life and you want happiness or whatever, you've got to take the initiative, even if it's not your fault.
Yeah.
I'm glad that is one of the byproducts of having a heart transplant and being faced with death. If it costs you, so what do everyday people need to do is just make that decision and have the perspective that says, don't have to go through a heart transplant to begin to take initiative to make peace with people.
Exactly. You can learn from other people. And
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you ever get so busy with life and you're going and you're moving and you got to go and that sort of thing that you forget the eternal perspective, that you get sucked right back into the way the world teaches you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, some people that have had heart surgeries or any surgery for that matter hate their scars. And I love my scar because I see it every day and it brings me, ooh, that got me. It brings me back to my knees in that place with Jesus. Not only just a thankfulness, but just like, okay, again, perspective, like real world. Like I've been going and doing and just like living my life. Like, Jesus, you're good. You're over on the side. I don't need you right now because nothing major is going on. But yeah, every day it brings me back. Now, am I great at that every day? No. And are there months where I go on and I'm like, everything's fine. I'm just living life. And then, yeah, you're hit with something and it's like, wow, this is real. I could have died. Somebody died for me. It's crazy, but it is amazing how all of that can just bring you right back to him.
Yeah, life is going to pull you. And no matter what your situation is, you can be retired with no kids, and I promise you're going to be busy.
Yeah.
And life is going to pull you into busy and into activity and producing fruit. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But it can cause you to lose that perspective, I would think, even in the face of someone who's had a heart transplant.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm human. So
and you got to bring yourself.
I'm going to do that.
And you got to come back to that, though, right?
Right. You have to come back to that. And I think that's why it's so important and I'm not always good at this. I go through, and I think like anybody does in life, you go through great months, where you're on a schedule and you're doing a Bible study and you're really digging in the Word and you're exercising and all this stuff. And then you miss one day and it's like, then you miss 2 days. And then like weeks down the road, you're like, oh my goodness, I've only been doing this here and there. And I've really got to get back, on track. And so I definitely think it's a reality check.
And
sometimes.
You just got to bring yourself back.
You
right?
do. As long as you bring yourself back, it's like people, when they're going through a hard time, whether it's, with themselves, they're just struggling with some stuff or like spiritual warfare, or they've lost a loved one, or you're just having a bad day. You can have a bad day and you can sit in that and you can acknowledge it. You can't stay in that place. You got to get out of it.
So what do you do? What does that look like for you?
If I'm in a place like that, well, I used to go to the bookstore and, that was my place in high school and college. And even after we got married, I would go to the bookstore and I would wander the bookstore and just kind of, talk to God the whole time I was there, just like in my head, just wandering the bookstore. And it just would give me like a peace and a clarity. And that was kind of the thing now that I do. I feel like a lot of times shower is like my go-to, or I sit in my closet and I'm like, I need to regroup. I need to get myself together. Turn on some praise music. I'll usually run an errand and turn on a podcast or praise music. And cause sometimes you just got to clear your head and just get out of that place and then bring it back to him and get centered again with him.
But you got to make time you got to make yourself do that, because you can get sucked into busy and never do it. And the times where I personally felt the most spiritually distant was when there were large gaps in time between prayer.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I'm saying? And you're talking about going to the bookstore, you're talking about going to the shower, you're about going to the closet or get in the car by yourself. Jesus did the same thing. He didn't put on a podcast, but he constantly throughout Scripture says, and he went off to a desolate place by himself and basically reconnected. He did it all the time. And I'm sure he was in prayer all the time too.
Yeah.
But even the work that he was doing, God work, right? Healing and feeding people all over the place and disease and teaching and that sort of thing, he would withdraw from that.
Right.
To go be alone in prayer with God.
Yeah, and I think for me, like keeping a prayer journal or just a journal in general, whether it's one line a day or I jot down like some of my happies for the day or the week, is a big thing for me. And again, I'm not always good about doing it, but when I do, it keeps me in a place that is always diving into him a little bit more. And I notice that when life does get busy and you start dropping the things that are probably the things that you need to keep, like writing down your gratitude every day or really spending quality time in prayer. You know, those are the things that are easy to be like, oh, I can do that later. I've got to get so-and-so to school, or I've got to make this meeting or drop off this package or whatever. But I think, just having that time to yourself to reconnect and be like, okay, I've got to get back on this schedule. This is what I want to do. This is what I need to do. I want to learn. Yeah, but I mean, life can get in the way, but you just have to make a conscious effort to do it. Yeah,
well, I think the point being, even a heart transplant recipient who has tremendous perspective on what adversity and facing the end of life actually looked like, still can get busy in life and need to reconnect. And so all of us mortals down here who've not been through a heart transplant, we're not alone. You do the same thing.
Exactly.
So, and I think that's an important point. But, you have been through something that almost nobody else has been through that people know. I would challenge anybody to name more than 2 people that you know who've had a heart transplant. Yeah. I mean, I would think you probably don't even know one. I know for sure of one, maybe 2. So it's a pretty unique perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You're 38 now, and you've been given this in your 5 years on the other side of the transplant. I know there's been challenges. I know it's not automatic. There's probably things that go on that might be presenting potential rejection of the heart at times, and I'm sure there's worry and stress and the things that just go with getting a new heart. But there's also the spirituality of the experience, and we would be remiss in conversations like this if we didn't try to pull a lot of that out. But given your perspective and the fact that you are in territory that very few go, what message would you share with other people from where you stand?
That's a good question. I mean, there's so many things that I've learned from this and so much more that I keep learning. I just feel like God's never done with you, and we can always grow and learn. I guess my message would be, you have a choice. And I know we've talked about that a little bit, but you have a choice in life and every day to choose joy and hope, and or you can let the world and life get you down. And I think it all comes back to that perspective of how you perceive things and how you choose to live out your life. and your day to day. I guess too, I know that it's kind of cliche to say this, but we all say you're not promised tomorrow. But I feel until you've been through something like I have, you don't really know the depths or heaviness of that. So I always tell people, you aren't promised tomorrow. You aren't promised the next minute. And that's not to live in fear or be scared or feel like you have to be this perfect person all the time. But that just means to let things go. Let the small things go and sit in him and be still and know him. Because to get to know him and have a better relationship with him is going to be more so than stressing out about what you're going to serve that night at dinner.
And I would think part of that would have to also be to make the most of what you do have.
You do. And so that's a great point. One of my biggest things I've learned is take the opportunities. And there's so many times where, there might be friends gathering at a house or, a Bible study going on or whatever the case may be, whatever the activity or event is, the opportunity that's in front of you. And how many times are we like, gosh, I am so tired. I do not want to go. I don't want to get dressed. It's been a long week. I've been working, blah, 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 or I have to find a babysitter or whatever, it is. But take those opportunities because you never know what you're going to learn from that, what you're going to gather from that. And you never know when you're going to have the next opportunity to do so. And I think that was a big thing for me is I could always make an excuse to not do something. I mean, I loved my friends and my family and church family and whatnot.
But you also love a good nap, right?
Exactly. And so, I think you got to take those opportunities because you're not guaranteed those opportunities. And usually at, the end of the night after the event or the little gathering or whatever it is, you have a smile on your face. And not only is your face smiling, but your heart is smiling because it was filled and you needed that. And so I try really hard to live my life every day with saying yes to opportunities. And I know the world will tell us to learn to say no. And yes, there is a time and a place for the word no for sure. But I think, you kind of have to take that challenge on as far as you don't know when you're going to get to see those people next.
How has your understanding of God changed post-transplant?
I think I've always known, in my head that he is much bigger than us and can move mountains. But I don't think I've really truly known heart-wise what that means. And he is so much bigger and so much greater and can do so much more. And I don't want to say I've never known that because I have. I think it's like, oh, that. It's just kind of like something you say in passing. But I truly feel that now. And I guess another thing, back to your other question about like what message, I think the other thing too is like to love big and laugh often because we have been so loved on and people have shown up for us. And that is something that I have really learned is to just show up. When people are struggling, having a hard day, losing a loved one, need a meal, and you call that person and say, what can I do for you? They're going to tell you no. And instead, you have to change the narrative and say, I'm bringing you dinner. Is there something you want? Not just, can I bring you dinner? You just have to do it. Those people are, having a hard time or life is crazy for them or they're in the hospital with a baby or whatever it is, sickness, loss of job. You just have to show up. And that either means calling them, sending them a text message, putting a note in the mailbox, dropping a meal, putting bottled water at their house. There were so many people that wanted to do so much for us going through all of this. And of course, there wasn't a ton they could do, but they want to feel like they can do something. And we finally learned, like, just tell them something to do because they want to. And at the end of the day, it was so nice for all those people to do what they did for us. It just makes your heart smile, whether you really needed that case of water on the front of your steps or not. You just kind of smile and go, gosh, it feels so nice to be thought about and to be loved today, even though you know that your friends and family are always thinking about you and loving you, but to get that note in the mailbox or whatever it is. So just show up, love big, love your people big, and laugh often. Laughter is so good for the heart. I mean, even in the deepest, darkest moments, scariest times in the hospital, something would happen and we would just all bust out laughing. And it was like, okay, we're gonna be okay. Laughter can be so good for the heart. And that is one thing that I've learned and I think has changed so much in Edward and I's marriage is instead of holding those grudges or instead of getting irritated at maybe something he would say as a joke where he meant it as a joke and pre-transplant, I took it as, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that to me. That is so annoying. You know, oh, now I'm frustrated. Now I just bust out laughing for the most part and think it's so funny. And that has changed the dynamic, you know, for us.
That is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a hard choice to make. That is a choice. And I am learning that now, for sure.
It is a choice and it's not always easy. But I've been thankful to, you know, have that 180 switch to be like, I can do this. And yes, there are some times where I'm always going to be irritated with somebody or annoyed at something somebody did or said. But if you can turn it into laughter, it's life-changing.
Yeah, that's big.
Mm-hmm.
That's big.
It's life-changing. But God to me now is so much bigger, I guess. It's not knowledge, it's a feeling. And I think
we always make him too small.
Yeah, we do. And just, you know, having that feeling that he is all-knowing, all-powerful, always present, he never leaves you, is, you know, just gives you not only a good feeling, but it just gives you more of a connection.
That's big. That's actually a really good exercise too. The whole he tells us be still and know that I am God. Invites me anyway. Makes me think that there are times that I need to sit in prayer and shut up.
Yeah.
You can actually not talk in prayer.
Yeah.
That's a crazy thing to think about, right? And then just ponder the magnitude of who God is. And know that no matter how big you get in your thought, that's only a fraction of what really is there.
Mm-hmm. And I think I really learned that in those early mornings of those hospital rooms. We were in the hospital a lot longer than anticipated because I had some things going on that doctors didn't know what was happening, and it took a while to figure those out. So somebody that's in the hospital, you know, 7 to 14 days post-transplant, I was in the hospital 7 weeks. And then many, many stays after that. Those first 18 months were really challenging. But in those early moments of the hospital, you know, I don't think I slept for 7 weeks. And my sweet mom and husband truly never left my side. My sisters and my dad, they always showed up. One of my sisters was pregnant with her first baby and so swollen and did not need to be worrying about coming up to the hospital, but she did. And my oldest sister, who has 4 children of her own and a full-time job, was juggling all of them and always showed up. But those quiet mornings where Mom and Edward were asleep in a chair, because yes, for 7 weeks, my mother and Edward stayed in that hospital room and never left my side. And there were some nights where they would trade out. Mom would stay and Edward would leave. But if not, they were I was never by myself. Let me say that. But those moments right before the chaos of the day, because in the hospital it starts very early. But right before, I guess, my like 4:30 blood draws was kind of my time where God just made himself so big and so real to me. And I was able to sit in those moments and, like you were saying, just listening, you know, not so much in prayer, but just listening to what he had to say, or what I needed to learn, or, you know, a verse would come to mind, or a song, you know, and that would kind of be my little mantra for that day. Whatever he revealed at that 3:30 in the morning hours, when I wasn't like online shopping or something. But he would reveal something to me, and I would kind of carry that with me throughout, you know, that day or the next few days or whatever it was. And those were some of the like most intimate times I feel like I've had with him. And even, no, I do not want to be in the hospital for 7 weeks again, but I'm thankful for those times and those moments that I could sit and be still. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice to not be still and listen. And that's something that I will never forget and always be grateful for, because not everybody has that opportunity either.
Man, that's really powerful to think about, the just times of just silence at 3:00 in the morning. I get those all the time because I just wake up and
Same.
that sort of
Insomnia.
thing. Yeah, and I'm ticked off, and
Yeah.
I'm never going back to sleep now, and I'm going to be tired all day and all that kind of stuff. But no,
Yeah.
those are some special times when, if you can immerse yourself in the magnitude of God,
Mm-hmm.
and all those things that we worry about at 2:30 or 3:00 in the morning, because
Right.
those are the things that like to creep in for sure. And I know that everybody listening to this can understand that. But when you can reserve that space for the magnitude of the author of life, and clear it from those things, and just pay attention to him and listen, that's really cool.
Yeah. And that's what was so nice about that time, is because I didn't have the distractions of the world.
Yeah.
I didn't have a job. I was stuck in a hospital room and could not worry about anything else except being there.
Let me ask you a question. Let's go back to the night before the transplant.
That was an interesting night.
What was happening spiritually and emotionally? What was that like?
So the whole process is kind of crazy in the fact that the status that I was listed at, I didn't have to stay in the hospital, but I also wasn't the highest priority. So if a heart came and wasn't the best option for me and would have been better for somebody else, we had time to pass that up. So the first time I was called was almost 6 weeks to the day after I was officially listed, and it was about 2:30 in the morning. I'm the worst about answering my cell phone, or was. And when you're listed, you have to always answer your cell phone from unknown numbers, because
in those days, I bet you would have been on the list for so many car warranty extensions.
Exactly. And you're like, no, thank you. Please take me off your call list. I always want to be present with everybody. It drives me crazy in the cell phone age that like we go to lunch with people or coffee or whatever, and we all have our phones out on the table. So I was like a huge person, like I'm not putting my phone on the table. Okay. Well, life changed at that point because I had to. I couldn't miss a call. And so I always had my phone with me. And the night that we first got called, that December 1st, I think, it was 2:30 in the morning. My phone rang. It's on silent. I just happened to be up, and I kind of heard it vibrating, and I looked at it and I was like, pretty sure that's a UAB number. Need to answer that, but I'm going to let it ring. So I let it go to voicemail. if you're ever listed for transplant, this is not what you're supposed to do. I am not the poster child, so do not take this advice.
I can't imagine that was in the instructions.
Yeah, but
send this first one
send
to
the
voicemail.
first one to voicemail. So sent that one to voicemail. They called a second time. I did the same thing.
What?
Because I just knew, like I knew from the moment that my phone rang that that's what it was. But I was like, okay, just to be sure. Because not only do they have my number, if they can't get me after like 3 tries, they would call Edward. If they couldn't call Edward, we gave them my dad's number because my mom is the world's worst about answering her phone. So, and my dad, being in the field that he was, answers every single phone call. So Edward's cell phone rang on the other side of the bed. And I was like, okay. So I answered it. And it actually, one of the girls that called me was a friend from college that happened to be on call that night, that happened to work in the heart transplant office and called me. And so she was like, we have a potential donor. You know, you have 2 hours to get here. So we'll see you in a little while. Come to the floor and we'll start doing your workup and whatever. So just to give y'all a little background, when you're called, they've usually known about the heart or the organ, whatever organ it is, for a couple days. And the reason is because, one, they have to get the donor ready. They have to make sure that the family is okay. They have to, you know, do all the legal paperwork and all that. But then they have to coordinate all the organs that are going to all different parts of the country. The heart can only be so far away. It has to be able to get within a certain amount of time to that person. And so you have all these surgery centers, all these hospitals trying to coordinate who's coming in. The heart's obviously the last thing to go. So you've got to make sure that all of that's coordinated and ORs are booked and flights can get in and all of this kind of stuff. So it's kind of crazy because when you get that call, or when I got that first call, like immediately, and I think that's why I avoided the first couple phone calls, is because I knew that somebody had lost their life.
Yeah.
And that just sat hard with me. And so when I did get that call, immediately I went into like medical mode. Okay, let's take a shower. Probably not going to have one of those in a little, in a few days. I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to get Edward. My bag's already kind of ready to go. I'll call my family, check the boxes. But then your next thought is, oh my goodness, a family is heartbroken and grieving. And so then you just start praying for that family. And I don't think I ever really prayed at that moment. I don't think my prayer was ever, let this work out. I just prayed for that family. And I think once I got to the hospital that night, that then I was praying, just for like the surgeons and just being with everybody in the operating room. And if this was my heart, and if this was the heart for me, that everything would go smoothly and work out, and just whatever his plans were. That heart ultimately did not work out for me. After about 36 hours, and usually this process is a lot quicker and a lot easier, but after about 36 hours, I got wheeled back to the OR. I was outside the operating room, and they had forgotten to get a pregnancy test on me. And the surgeon was ballistic because I was ready to go. But it was kind of a blessing because it delayed the process a little bit. And so you have a team that goes and looks at the heart and brings it back. And then you have the surgical team whatever hospital you're going to be at. And until that surgeon sees that organ with his own eyes and can give his blessing on it, and yes, they do a million tests and measurements and all this stuff to make sure it's right for the recipient. But until he really sets his eyes on that organ, he doesn't know if it's really going to work or not, even if all the tests come out. So I was about to go get a pregnancy test, and he comes out into the hallway and is like, Whitney, this one's not for you. And I said, okay, I'm okay with that. Tell me, what's going on. And he said, I'm so sorry that you've been here all night. it definitely took a little bit longer than we anticipated. I'm so thankful that we weren't already in the OR, because a lot of times people will go in, be cut open, and then it doesn't work. And so they wake up thinking they're healed to a point.
Yeah.
And they're not. And so anyway, he was like, Whitney, this one's a little bit big for your body. And you are not in a life and death situation, so you have time to wait, and this needs to go to somebody else. And I said, it's not my heart. It's not. God has the perfect one for me, and this needs to go to somebody else. And so we made the decision that it wasn't the right time. So fast forward a couple months. So in between that time and the second time I get called, you have your cell phone with you, all that stuff. And so for a while, like right when you get listed, every time your cell phone rings, you're so anxious because you're like, oh my gosh, is this it? Is this it? Is my bag packed? And you're thinking, do I have my life in order? Like, does Edward know my passwords to things? Are the bills going to be paid? Do I have a will? Like, what do I need to do? So you run around doing all those things. And then after the first one, and thankfully somebody had told me that you could get called multiple times before it really happens. And I was so thankful for that, because some people didn't get that message. And so they, like I said, they wake up and they are like, what do you mean I didn't get a heart? Anyway, the night that we got called for the one that worked for me, and I had a complete peace from the moment my phone rang. Like, I knew this one was it. The first one, I didn't want to be like negative Nancy and say anything to my family, but I just had a funny feeling about it the whole time. Like, I just kind of knew that something was off, something wasn't right. And so Edward and I had just been to look at a house that day, and we were standing in the living room. It was about 9:45 at night, and my phone rang, and I knew immediately who it was. And again, I let that one go to voicemail.
You have not learned anything.
I didn't learn one thing. I did not learn one thing. But the second time it called, I answered, and Edward was on the other line. So I was looking at him, and I was like, hey, like kind of whispering, like, this is it, get ready. And so we went up to UAB. I did not call my family until I was almost to the hospital, because last time everybody had showed up and all this stuff. And then I just, it takes a minute to know if it's going to be the right one or not. And so I was like, I just want y'all to know I'm on the way, but y'all hang tight. Don't come up here yet until we know a little more information. And so from the moment you're called, it's just kind of pure chaos a little bit, because you're getting a shower. You have to be there within 2 hours. So from the time I was listed until the time I was transplanted, I had to be within a 2-hour radius at all times. And if I wanted to travel, I could, but that just meant you had to be put on hold on the list. So if a potential heart came up for me while I was out of town, I would have never known about it, because it just skipped over me. So we made the decision not to be anywhere over 2 hours. So anyway, that night, and then once they do all like my blood workup and stuff, those moments again in that room, Edward was asleep, and I have a picture of him sleeping, and it was just peace. It was just calm, and nothing was frantic. Nope. It was just peace. And I knew, and I just spent that whole night just kind of like tying up loose ends and then just, being in prayer and talking to God back and forth, just being like, this is it. And it's gonna be okay, and just reassuring my family that things were going to be okay, because of course, like, I definitely think they have the harder job being on the other end. I mean, they're the ones that have to sit in the waiting room for hours upon hours, and then seeing your loved one with tubes down their throat and wires and tubes coming out of your neck and monitors floor to ceiling and 30 different something medicines and all this stuff when you come out of the operating room. To me, they definitely have the harder job. To me, I got to go to sleep, and at that point it was in the Lord's hands, and I couldn't do anything about it. But it was just so peaceful, honestly, and that's why I knew that second call, that was it, that sweet precious donor had made that decision, And it was the perfect heart for me. And God knew that from day one.
You got a trial run.
Yeah. And I'm thankful for that.
And you knew to keep the family away until you knew that it was good. And all of that were elements that made up that piece beforehand, I guess.
Yeah. That trial run I like to call it my dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
Because I was a dancer, and so we always needed a dress rehearsal. And yes, we all needed a dress rehearsal. I think it kind of got the jitters a little bit out of everybody. And then also the little things like, oh, maybe I need to bring my toothbrush. You know, my sisters were like, maybe I need to bring a toothbrush, something, because we don't know how long we're going to be here. That moment, though, I was blessed with some really incredible nurses. And the first time I got called, and as soon as I was outside the OR and they had to wheel me back to the hospital room to tell my family that it wasn't a go, my nurse made everybody leave the room. And he was like, Whitney, I just feel like you need a moment to process what's happened. Because even though I had that feeling of this is not the right one, I kind of knew that until I got back to that hospital room and the hustle and bustle of like the OR and the nurses and the doctors and all of that. You know, it did kind of settle, and it was like, okay, that didn't happen, and it's okay, but I did need that moment. Another cool moment was that first time before they took me back to the OR. I was in a room, and everybody was there. Edward's Sweet Pledge Brothers had sent breakfast and coffee to the family. I mean, people we hadn't talked to in years, like, just showed up, and my mom's best friend and my sisters and brother-in-laws and all of that. And my mom has always been like so just level-headed about all my heart stuff and just, you know, a rock. She has just always been there for me, but never really truly showed much emotion with it. And that moment right before they wheeled me back, she was sitting on my bed and holding my hand. And my bed was shaking because her body was so nervous and shaking. And it was kind of the thing that I needed to know that, like, not that I didn't ever know that this affected Mom, because it obviously did her whole life, but just to know that, like, it was like almost like she was human and had those feelings and those emotions. It was just a sweet, I don't even know if she knows this, but it was just a sweet moment between both of us, because I could tell she was nervous and scared without her saying that, but she was also excited and prayerful and thankful, you know, and worried. I mean, you have every emotion at this point, but just like her holding my hand, sitting on the bed and truly feeling her emotion was a really cool moment for me.
Yeah, it would have to be bringing to light the depths of which she loved you.
Yeah, for sure.
And that has to be a comforting feeling.
It was. I mean, she's, like I said, has never left my side. Nobody in my family has, but she's been to every doctor's appointment and every procedure and everything. And I think when Edward and I got married, she worried that was going to kind of go away, because Edward was my person now. And I looked at her one day and I was like, Mom, just because Edward and I are getting married does not mean that he replaces you with all of this. You have been with me since day one. And yes, he's going to be there and support me, but I want you by my side too. And if you know, I'm going to tell you about every single appointment and everything, and I want you to be there if you want to. But I would never, you know, I think she just felt like she was going to be replaced or be left, and she wasn't. And I wasn't going to let that happen. And Edward knew, I think from day one of meeting me, that Mom would always be a part of that. I mean, my dad was at every appointment too, but that they were always going to be there. And so it was a really neat moment to have with her on the side of the bed that morning.
Yeah, and I think if you look back over so many things, you can't help but see how God has put things in place to reshape who you are,
Yeah.
your relationships, your understanding of Him, faith in general, into the person you are now and building blocks into the person that you will be.
Yeah, continuing to be. I think, through this whole process, I've never had fear or worry or any of that. And that's just truly God taking that away, because I can't do that on my own. But post-transplant, I don't know if everybody that has a transplant feels like this, but I felt pressure's not the right word, and not heavy, but you do feel a sense of like, what do you do with your life now? You've been given this second chance on life. Do you, go start an orphanage in Africa, or can you make the same difference? Can you have an impact on people? My prayer for so long was just like, God, what do you want me to do? I'm here with the second chance of life. Where do you want me? What do you want me to do? How do you want to use me? And I think for the last 5 years, I have struggled really, really greatly with that. And I still don't know that I know the answer. Somebody did tell me one day, they were like, Whitney, you can make an impact and you can make a difference. Whether you're working retail and it's a smile on your face to somebody that might have been having a bad day that you have no idea, you might have made their day better. You might have impacted their day just by being friendly to them. You don't have to go and do these huge things. You can make an impact here. So stop stressing out about what and where and who and when that God wants you, and focus on what you can do in the now. And God will give you that answer. And so I don't know that I've really found that answer as to what He wants to do, but I do try to just be present every day and in prayer of what He wants me to do. What does that look like? Does it mean I start a foundation? I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like there's something big, and I'm like, God, can you just please write it in the sky? Because I'm not clear on it. I have not gotten that message.
A lot of us do that. And I know a lot of people that are, not a lot, I know some people that are waiting for that thing. And I would say something very similar to what your friend said. In my experience, and I'm in a similar place.
Yeah.
I do this now. And it didn't start like this. What I found to be the case is that God is going to place you in the position that you need to be in. Mm-hmm. So when we begin to look and think about grand things or whatever, that's fine. As long as we don't look out on the horizon so far that we don't see what's directly in front of us. Because that's usually where I find that He puts what you should do now. And most foundations and other large things that exist started because of something that was right in front of somebody.
Right.
And it started very small. And then 1 turned into 2, turned into 4. And over some amount of time, that prayer that you prayed about impacting people for the kingdom of God in a grand way suddenly begins to emerge.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, it's, like I said, I think that's been like the hardest thing that I've had with this, is because you do sort of feel this pressure to do something like magnificent, but then I have to like come back down to earth and be like, if one person is changed or impacted, then then it starts with that. It starts with that one person, and that one person, from whatever they learned or were impacted with, is going to trickle to the next person. And so you don't have to go do this grand, magnificent, big thing, or in my head, what is big? Big can mean one person.
Well, and a giant tree doesn't start off as a giant tree. It starts off as a seed, right?
Yeah.
And so when you plant those seeds and when you follow and have a heart to follow where God is leading you, he will take that. And I guess the point of that is don't overlook the thing that's right in front of you.
Right. And I think we can miss that a lot of times.
We do, because we're thinking about bigger stuff.
Bigger stuff, yeah.
That's not big. That's just one little thing, right?
Right,
And,
right.
So I think that's a real important spiritual truth that we're surfacing here. So, I mean, wow, you've had a lifetime of this ordeal. It could be viewed as an ordeal. It can also be viewed as a tool and a thing that has shaped you into the person you are now, to the wife you are now, to the daughter you are now, the sister you are now, the friend that you are now, and that has prepared you to do things going forward. And, you know, one of the questions I would have asked if you hadn't started, is what's next? And, you know, I think in my conversations with other people, and I talk about, you know, future plans and what's on the horizon, most people say, wherever God takes me. I'm not mapping out a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look at what he's putting right in front of me. And it could look different every day. And I just got to have the heart to follow where that leads. So
right. Every day is a blessing. And I just try to take that and make the most of it. Yeah. And I think that's, you know, all you can ask for.
Well, I think you got it right going into the surgery too. And once you got on the list, it was like, hey, it's not about me.
It's not.
Let's let your will be done and give me the heart to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest will take care of itself.
That's right. That's right.
Whitney Hubbard, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming and sharing not just the events of what took place, but the soul of what took place and how it's shaped your faith and how it's given you a right perspective and how it's given you a level of understanding of your Creator and His presence in your life that you didn't have, maybe you couldn't have had without the things that you've experienced. So thank you for coming and doing this.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
I wonder why we don't do a better job of learning from people like Whitney. What is it about having to deal with life and death matters that causes us to gain true perspective on the things that really matter in life? We know that everyone experiences some form of major life challenge, pain, loss, or other adversity. Jesus himself tells us that everyone will have trouble. He also tells us to be ready for it because we have no idea when it'll happen. This week, I want to encourage all of us to take steps to be more ready than we are. If you don't pray with any regularity, start. If you do pray, but not daily, carve out time in your schedule to start praying daily. If you pray once daily, carve out time to pray twice daily. Let's all commit to taking steps this week of being better prepared spiritually than we are today. It may be the difference in successfully navigating what lies right around the corner, and will most certainly bring peace where we need it the most. Thank you for joining us today on A Stronger Faith. Please visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or at astrongerfaith.com if you have a story you feel should be shared to help others see the works of God. Until next time, we pray for peace and a stronger faith for you and those you love.